Comes to our session 2, and session 2, our title is Current and Future Research Direction, Leveraging Community and Cultural Strengths to Achieve Health Equity for Pasifika. And we have two wonderful speakers, Dr. Keawe Kaholokula and Dr. Kelsie Okamura. Dr. Keawe Kaholokula is a professor and chair of Native Hawaiian Health at the John A. Burns School of Medicine. He is a clinical health psychologist and translational behavioral scientist who leads multiple federally funded research projects to improve Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander health. Dr. Kelsie Okamura is an implementation researcher at the Data Center for Children and Families, a Harvard Medical School affiliate, a licensed psychologist, and serves on the training, consultation, and distance learning development teams at Practice Rise, LLC. Welcome.
All right.
Yeah.
Oops, to start. Thank you. Right.
And you can use this to control the slides.
I like that. Yeah. Good.
There you go.
Aloha mai kākou.
Say short enough. Thank you.
Mahalo for the invite to be here and for sharing a little bit about the work we're doing. Yeah. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. Actually, I had a presentation prepared, and after hearing the earlier panel, I think I'm going to focus in a little more on certain things versus other things. But I'll start off with my mo'olelo, my story, because I think it's very much in line with the women that were talking earlier. Although I was not incarcerated, I was probably close to being incarcerated sometime in my life. And I think the theme that we heard earlier panel is culture is medicine. Culture is healing. The other theme is structural changes need to happen, so we put ourselves out of a job. Totally agree with that. So I'm going to just focus in on that because culture changed my life. Culture, I was a public school graduate, and I didn't plan to go to college. Didn't plan to ever step foot on a college campus at all. I actually went into the job force, worked 5 years full time. And it wasn't until the centennial of the overthrow in 1993. So in 1992, going into the centennial, I became an activist. But like most Hawaiians of my generation, my parents, although my grandparents on both sides spoke Hawaiian, they didn't. So there was a lot of language loss, a lot of cultural loss, and we're regaining that, and the political sovereignty movement was happening. So a lot of cultural consciousness aware building and so forth. So I was one of those young folks at the time who got really involved. And one of the things I got involved in was learning the language. So I would take night courses from Carol Silva. And at the time, they were offering free courses for Native Hawaiians because they were preparing for the centennial. And so I would show up at night classes here on this campus, which was the first time I think I stepped on this campus, was to take those night courses. But she said one thing to me. She said, if you're serious about the language, you gotta come to university and learn it formally. So I took her seriously. I quit my job. I enrolled at Kapiolani Community College just to find out that it was so popular, the Hawaiian language, that I could not get in my first semester. I didn't have priority. I had to actually be enrolled, take classes, and then have priority to get in. So it wasn't until my third semester at KCC that I got into Hawaiian language. But of course, I had to take courses in the meantime to get to that point. And I learned I really loved education. I loved learning, and I stayed in. And my intent was to take 101 to up to 202 at KCC, and that was it. I ended up transferring to Manoa. I ended up getting a Ph.D. in psychology. Long story how I switched from language and so forth to psychology. But anyway, I just want to share that because I think that's the theme. Culture is medicine, culture is health. And for us as indigenous people of these islands, Native Hawaiians, we have been deprived of that. The historical trauma, the cultural loss that have occurred have put us at a tremendous disadvantage in society, has made us second-rate citizens in our own homeland. But the return to our culture, which strongly started in the 1970s with the second Renaissance, by the way. It wasn't the first Hawaiian Renaissance. The first Hawaiian Renaissance was during Kalakaua's time when he revived the hula and other practices because the missionaries had banned hula. So the second Renaissance of the 70s really elevated our awareness and cultural identity as Hawaiians and really created this positive momentum forward for us that allowed us to, I think, as a community begin to heal. We're still not there yet, but I think tremendous strides have been made. And I want to share a little bit about that because what I'm very passionate about, the work I do, is I do interventions. I like to develop interventions, culturally grounded interventions, working with our communities because I want to find solutions to our health problems. But I want to do so that in a way that is culturally responsive, that makes sense. And I know we heard the word sustainability, and I totally agree, but how do we make these things sustainable beyond just the grant life or funding, right? Beyond a study that gets into a library on a bookshelf that only few people read and really use. And if you don't know, in the average time it takes to get from a study, a trial, efficacy study, an intervention is shown effective, it takes around 17 years to actually get out into real world settings to impact real people. But only about 16% of them actually get that far. So my whole goal and one of my goals in the work I do is to expedite that by actually looking towards community-based or community-responsive solutions, working with community partners who can help us make it real for our communities. But before I get there, I'm not gonna follow my slide as I mentioned earlier because I really was inspired by the talk earlier, and I thought maybe I'd shift a little bit, but I'll still get to the points that I wanted to make. But as you know, there's been so much to happen. If you see the model up here that I'm showing, the social determinants of health, if you will, social and cultural determinants of health, in this case for Native Hawaiians. By the way, Mohalei Kawai Kamako Kapua, the Olelo no Eal down there, is an ancient proverb, predates Western concept of social determinants of health. But it's essentially that, saying that people cannot, like flowers, without the right nutrients, without the right environment, we can't thrive. There is no way, right? So our ancestors knew this. So we'll give the Western society credit for coming up with something that is actually ancient to many cultures, but just to know that it's an ancient concept, but so much has changed. So you look at the different pillars here. Historical determinants that has led to historical loss, historical trauma. And I won't go over all of this, I assume many of you know this already. But just to say, these are things that have carried forward. It's not just in the past, it's still in the present for us in many different ways. It has affected our political status and other political-related, social-political issues for us as Hawaiians. Although we have the Ali'i Trust, right? Kamehameha Schools, Lunalila Homes, Lili'uokalani Trust. There's still monies, so we're wealthy. Kamehameha Schools, largest private landowner in the state. It's all locked up in trust for certain purposes. So as a people, we still struggle. But nevertheless, we have these opportunities. But the point I want to make is really the cultural determinants of health is important. For indigenous people, we're not immigrants, we're not refugees. We are native. We never sought to give up anything. We never said we're going to leave our homeland and acquire a new culture or language to make a better life because we had to, right? That's not the case for American Indians, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders. So we have to understand that for us, we heal from cultural, historical trauma. And all the other traumas are really built up upon that issue. Always the underlying current for us as Native people is the historical loss, is the historical trauma, which just exacerbates all other forms of trauma, puts us in conditions for which we're at risk for all these other types of trauma. But I just want to emphasize for us, it's part of our social determinants of health. Our cultural determinants are important. And you heard this from the women earlier. When they strengthened their Hawaiian identity. When I strengthened my Hawaiian identity, I got a Ph.D. And I did not come from pedigree. I was the first in my family to go to college, so I'm a first generation graduate. No pedigree. But the culture, the identity uplifting, has led to changing behaviors and mindsets, and you heard that from the women. So important. So I really believe that. And all these things, how do we leverage that for health promotion? Whether it's for mental health issues, or behavioral health issues, whether it's for physical health. And what I share with you is more around the physical health, but it has cultural and emotional consequences, psychological consequences for our people. And as we all know, we are aspiring to revitalize our culture. Again, we've made huge strides in doing that, right? Our language is now more visible out there in the community more than ever. The 80s, we saw the rise of punana leo and immersion programs, and so on. We've now seen the benefits of that. But our people continue to strive for reconnecting to our cultures, revitalize it, making it mainstream. Yeah, us as Hawaiians, if we're going to heal from all this and move forward, we cannot be Hawaiians in homestay communities and in entertainment for tourists. And that's the only places you hear our language, our music, and so forth. We need to be part of the mainstream. It needs to be visible. We need to have a bilingual landscape like Aotearoa, New Zealand has. It needs to be out there. That's healing from trauma. That is us moving forward, building the identity so that we can begin to move forward. We know from research that 93% of Native Hawaiians strongly identify with the Hawaiian heritage. Despite we all mix. Look at me, right? We went from 700,000 Hawaiians in 1778 to barely 30,000 by the overthrow in 1893. Yeah? 30,000 Hawaiians left, outnumbered by foreigners, Asian and European. So of course, what you going to do? Marry your sister and brother? The missionaries stopped that for us, so we gotta intermarry. So like most indigenous people, we're very diverse ancestrally. But despite all that, we continue to cling to our identity, and we see that with Native Hawaiians. 80% strongly believe it's important to maintain our culture and practices for psychological well-being. Research from Kamehameha schools. Culture-based education strategies we know now, research from Kamehameha schools again, leads to better academic outcomes for our students, whether that's in private public schools or not, or special charter schools, and increase in pride and so forth. And of course, there is a strong desire by our folks to have a more holistic approach to health and well-being. So when we go out and ask Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders too, Samoans, others, what do we like to see? They want a more holistic approach, something that's more in line with their aspirations, their cultural values, and their modes of living, right? So all these things really play in. So we took that seriously. I took that seriously. And luckily, I have a background in, I'm also part of the Hale Mua Kuali'i. So Kylene earlier mentioned, I have been involved with the uplifting of our young men through the revitalization of the concept of the Hale Mua. The Hale Mua was the men's house of traditional times, right? The women had the Hale Papa, men had Hale Mua, and it was a way, around 7 or 8 years old, a young boy would enter the house of men, where they would learn their skill, their profession, all the religious ceremonies around that. They learn how to be a contributing member of society, right? So how do you move that forward in concept today? Because a lot of our men, as pointed out earlier, are struggling because of cultural loss, because of their diminished role from the traditional ways of being a man to the new ways, the expectations of Western society. Our men aren't doing as well as our female counterparts. So how do we make our young men better sons, better fathers, better contributors to society? So one thing we've done many years ago, started in the 90s actually, we started to revitalize the concept of Hale Mua. So I belong to a Hale Mua. Actually, one of the first Hale Muas to start Hale Mua Kuali'i here in Oahu. And we continue to do that work because we believe culture is the key to uplifting our people. And our young men needs to have those cultural values and perspectives in order for them to see a future for themselves in their communities. But returning to really over 12 years ago, I guess now, I've been doing a lot of work around culturally tailored interventions for our communities. So there's a difference, right, between culturally tailoring something and culturally grounded. Cultural tailoring is taking something else someone else designed for a different population, what they call evidence-based interventions, right? Usually among a mainly white sample, more affluent because they had the time to attend a trial. And then they say, oh, it's found to be effective in improving heart disease or whatever. And they tell everybody in the U.S., let's get this out. And for some groups, let's just adapt it. Let's maybe give it a Hawaiian name. Let's change the recipe that you're recommending for dietary changes. But that's insufficient. We know from research when you adapt, yeah, it's helpful, but maybe not as helpful. You don't get the effect size as you would like. So culturally grounded is completely on the other end of culturally tailoring, right? It's really where you so cultural tailoring is keeping the core curriculum that's previously designed with another population based on a different value system and perspective. But with a culturally grounded approach, it's really taking the perspective of that cultural group for which you're trying to develop an intervention for, right? Using their cultural values, practices, and perspectives as the foundation, as the core curriculum, right, of that intervention. That's what we did 12 years ago. Mele Look, I'll show a picture of her soon, came to me. She was our community engagement director. She said, Keawe, we need to write an NIH grant looking at hula as an intervention for something. And I remember saying, I don't know how I'm going to sell that to NIH reviewers. At the time, I couldn't see what the conceptual framework was and so forth. But luckily, she convinced me. We stuck in there. And we spent the time and effort to develop. And I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. But as you all know, hula is one of the hallmark features of our culture, our dance form. And so that's one of the things we thought we could leverage for health promotion as a culturally grounded, because it seemed to have all these components one would expect in a health promotion intervention, right? Especially one that's tailored towards preventing heart disease, for example, because it has exercise in it. It has exercise, the physical dance. Anybody dance hula before in the room? Besides, yeah? Anyone dance like it for competition, Mary Monarch? Only me. Yeah, hard. Our whole kahika was dock walk in. 80% of the dance was dock walk out for the Hawaii. So it can be intensive, the exercise. Because hula, you can control the intensity. You can speed up, have more up and down movements. You can vary it for different ages and different physical capacities. So we thought we could start with hula to show the value of our culture. And so we did that. And as you can see, the quotes we have from Kaholokula, which is why we have Mary Monarch, that hula is the language of the heart, therefore the heartbeat of our Hawaiian people. And Mapuana de Silva, who is the kumu hula expert, also have won many Mary Monarchs herself, is our kumu hula expert that started our journey with us in developing this. And she gives us a quote here that hula is our highest expression of who we are. It's our language put into motion. And so with all this, we thought, wow, could we leverage hula as a health promotion strategy? And again, I thought it was crazy, but I was willing to try it. Good scientists should always be open to trying something, testing out your hypotheses. I also value the culture. I danced hula for many years. So I thought, well, it's worth the effort. And so we're able to do that. And we hone in on hypertension because it's highly prevalent in our communities, right? High blood pressure. And it leads to stroke and heart disease, but it's modifiable. And we thought we could have an impact. A hula could have an impact. And there's all kinds of other reasons. Even with our communities, even though we get care, even though we're seeing our physicians, for some reason, we don't benefit from that care like other groups. Yeah? I don't, maybe we're not taking the medication. That may be so, but maybe not. But something else is going on that's preventing us from really managing our health and well-being. Again, when you talk about being disadvantaged in society, you talk about all these traumas laid upon each other that puts us at risk for heart disease and for other chronic diseases. But anyway, we started this journey. Olohoi Hula was the name of the intervention. We ended up giving it. Olohoi Hula means reviving life or health through hula. Olohoi Hula. And on the left there in the middle with your left, with the blue is Kumuhula Mapuana de Silva. And Mele Look, the person from our faculty who convinced me. And we started this journey. And we started to form the team. I mean, when we're doing this kind of work, we really need a team approach and we need expertise. And it's not often that us and academics seek out community expertise. We seek out community partners, right? Many of us, well, at least my colleagues do. But the expertise is really in our communities, especially what we were designing. So of course we had Mapuana de Silva on this project from the very beginning. And the good thing about her, she had a background. Her bachelor's degree was actually in physical education. So she really got it. We had Cy Bridges, one of our consultants, and then we had all this cardiologist, Dr. Todd Sito from Queens Health Systems, and so forth on the project. But we really needed to work with our communities to develop something. And that's the thing, when you're doing culturally grounded and mindful approaches, it's not something you can do overnight. And it's something that when you're using the culture to promote health and well-being, you have to approach it very sensitively and carefully. Because what you don't want to do is, again, like many of our cultural practices, it becomes, what word should I use?
Appropriated.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appropriated. And in ways that don't even make sense anymore. You see Ho'oponopono like that. Everybody's using it. Everybody's, you don't even know what Ho'oponopono is. And it happens. And then people make money off our culture. It's you and us, our people, right? And we didn't want that for hula. We wanted to maintain the cultural integrity of hula so that if we found this successful, then they can naturally get this in their environment, in their communities. It's not something that has to be changed so much it's no longer relevant. And the cultural components had to be maintained. And so we really engaged communities, and that's why it took 12 years. We spent a good number of years working with hula experts, kumu hula from across the islands, getting their thoughts. We worked with Native Hawaiians who had heart disease or at risk for heart disease. Because, do they see this as a valuable or viable health promotion strategy? And everything aligned. Everything started to align. And then we went on and did some formative work. And one of the first things we did was we needed to establish that hula could get the level of physical activity necessary based on federal national recommendations around intense, moderate to intense physical activity. And so we were the first to actually look at the METs, the metabolic equivalents of hula. And we found that, hula gets up there to a pickup basketball game and tennis, which was great. So we had the scientific evidence. See, remember, I was skeptical. We needed to get all the preliminary data, all the evidence to really point to this idea. And then we had to design. This is where Kumu Mapuana really came in, because she was really the expert. She designed the hula intervention, the song selections, the cool downs, the warm-ups, and everything. And as you can see, we applied, of course, all these clinical metrics and so forth to making sure people are getting the level of physical activity. But I won't bore you with all that. I'll get closer to the end here so that Kelsie can have her time, and then we can have a nice discussion. We also did a pilot project, and we got 55 Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. We tested out this 3-month hula-based intervention that Mapuana really designed. Met twice a week for 1 hour a week. They learned both kahiko, ancient hula, awana, modern hula. In the meantime, we had some hypertension self-management things about sodium reduction, less salt in your diet, and other things, how to understand your medication, talk more effectively with your physician, and so forth and so forth. Those were like 4 hours worth of the entire 3 months of time. Most of it was really hula. And as you can see, hula was superior to our control. So we had a waitlist control. We randomized people to either receive the intervention right away, wait 3 months, we'll give it to you after. We did it by site. We had one community health center, Kokuakali'i Valley, which many was Chukis participants. Pacific Islanders from the Micronesia region, and then we had a Native Hawaiian homestay community, so got Native Hawaiians. They were randomized by site, so we had equal distribution of groups, and as you can see, our hula was superior. We got significant reductions in those who had systolic hypertension uncontrolled, meaning that they were at the time above the systolic blood pressure. The top number was above 140 and above, and they were under physician care. And we wanted to see if we can get significant reductions in their blood pressure, and sure enough, we did. The control group also dropped a lot, but again, they were getting attention. They had some attention and other things, and some studies do show that waitlist controls, there's some changes in them as a result of knowing that they may be receiving the intervention later and so forth. Maybe they'll want to show us that we don't know what we're doing, and they'll want to foil our attempts. But anyway, we found great success. But the thing we found that's so interesting, because a lot of what we do in the health promotion area is we can get really great clinical outcomes. Most often we can't keep them sustained over time because real life hits and people can't sustain those changes. But we rarely see good social cultural outcomes. Mm-hmm. Like people don't come out of a mainstream Western intervention saying, I feel more Hawaii. Come on world, let's go, right? They don't do that. They feel, I feel better, I can feel like I maybe walk further and so forth, but that's good. But the idea was, can we give more to the people who participate, especially those who were traumatized, especially those with this kind of background like Indigenous folks have, of all this loss and disadvantage? Can we empower our people through these interventions at the same time? And we found, well, we probably could. So we found that we could, social functioning, which we knew the social aspect of hula was very important, and that improved. I think I'm almost out of time. But what we found, I'm interested in racism. And we actually measured racism. And for some reason, the intervention group significantly lowered their perceptions of racism. The control group had no change. And it's not like we changed the world for them, right? There was no structural changes that happened in 3 months of our study. But something about engaging in a culturally based study, intervention, changed the way they felt in society, perhaps. It gave them perhaps a coping style. I don't know. But something changed. And so we went on, I'm going to make the story short, we went on to test this more definitively. Here's our community partners. This is what it takes to do a culturally based intervention. A lot of involvement, a lot of support. And then we did a larger trial. I won't bore you all with that. We did it across 3 islands of our 5 major islands. It was very popular. We actually exceeded our recruitment. Here's the overall curriculum for this. So the second part, so I showed you the 3-month results in the preliminary trial we had. One of the things I didn't share with you is, unfortunately, after the 3 months, we got great results. We followed them up 3 months later after the intervention had stopped. We saw a return to baseline in their blood pressures, meaning that once the intervention was over, they started to go back to that high blood pressure that they had. So we knew that if we do something, the next step was we had to beef it up a bit, the intervention. So we added an additional 3 months for maintenance, and we added different components to it. You can see it here, but hula was still the main component across all. We had a larger study. We found same results. We found that our intervention was superior. This time, though, we actually gave everyone the healthy heart modules, those self-management for hypertension, to everyone. We wanted to see the incremental effects beyond physician care, beyond even the basic health education, whether or not we can, so hula in of by itself had benefits above and beyond those other strategies. And sure enough, that's why you still see an improvement in the control, but it was not as significant as a drop. And what's more impressive is this, that at 6 months, the intervention group, remember they're 140 and above. Most of that, so they dropped to, so 130 over 80 was the new recommendation based on the 2017 recommendations for hypertension management. They dropped below almost half, whereas it was less than half for the control. We also look at our 10-year risk for cardiovascular disease using the Framingham scores. There's actually a validated calculator to determine your risk 10 years later for heart disease. And we have all this information. We put that into the calculator, and we found that we significantly decreased the risk for 10-year risk for heart disease. Now, just to conclude really fast, culturally grounded approach really has more than clinical benefits. It really does have social cultural benefits, and we're still working on publishing some of that data from this study. But we are seeing that people, and testimonies, people feel like their identity is finally valued. They actually learn more about their community members because they're in the group with their other community members. They feel more connected. A lot of them, most of them, a great number of them end up actually joining a halau afterwards, and so forth. And now we have sustainability to some degree, where we have our hula, our 3-month version of our hula being offered in primary care settings. So Queens Health Systems offer it in 3 of their ambulatory clinics, 1 on Hawaii Island, 2 on this island. We have some of our community health centers still offering hula to their participants. Some of them are community health centers. So I'll stop there, other than, and the future direction is we need more of these. We just can't do culturally tailoring only. It doesn't reach as much folks, it doesn't resonate as strongly with our communities. And you don't, as far as I know, because I've done it, you don't get the cultural benefits that you see. You do get clinical benefits, but again, they're not sustained over time. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Kelsie. We can talk more. I'll bring it up for
Can you do it? Let me pull it up.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then you got the, if you want to, you can.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
thank you. Okay. And I might need to tippy toe. Keawe is a hard act to follow. I mean, all of these presentations have been so great. So I'm super excited to be here with you. I think you heard Kylene mention earlier, it's really important that we have good male role models, and Keawe has been one for me for many years. So just want to acknowledge that is such a huge part of kind of developing just as a professional and our research. So very excited to share this with you. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to talk more about a kind of public health problem, and as we kind of conceptualize things in terms of implementing some of these culturally grounded and evidence-supported treatments into community settings. So Keawe talked a little bit about, the difference between cultural tailoring and culturally grounded, but we still know that there's this large gap in order to get these practices into the communities that need them the most. And I'll tell you a little bit about what's next. So before I go into that, I think it's really important to kind of give you context under which I'm speaking. And so these are all of the fancy places that I've gotten to work in my many years on my professional development journey. Couple things to highlight is that, I'm born and raised here in Hawaii. I did my training at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. In the Department of Psychology, got my Ph.D. there. You're going to hear from my amazing grad school advisor, Dr. Brad Okamura, later on today. and he is really foundational in my thinking. And I also got to do clinical training in rural areas that are near and dear to my heart. So we have family, I have a house on Molokai, and so I got to do part of my pre-doctoral training at Iolalahui at Na Pu'uvai, and also Waimanalo Health Center. So a lot of these formative activities really shaped who I am as a researcher and a clinician. But really, who am I? Like, I am a mother of 3 children. These are my crazy 3 children. I'm 4th generation Okinawan Japanese, and so I'm a guest here in Hawaii. I grew up in Waipahu, so my family is plantation. We've lived next to the sugar mill for many years. We're probably gonna live there for many more generations. And I'm a psychologist, implementation researcher, and a soccer player. I kind of play taiko, but not so well, so I took that off actually for this presentation because I feel like there's probably more expertise here. But soccer, I've been playing for a long time, so I could say it to that. Okay. So I want us to think about a world, and this is really helpful when we're thinking about implementation science and how we're going to kind of shift systems and make new communities in order to sustain some of these practices that maybe we don't want to sustain. Imagine this world where there is no suffering, that every problem has the right solution, everything has a tailored solution, and everything just works perfectly. What are you doing in that world? Who are you with? How are you spending your time? I want you to think about that as we're kind of going through these slides, because a lot of that shapes kind of the research that I do and kind of the projects that we work on. So this goes without saying. We have, a youth mental health crisis currently going on. The Surgeon General, made that very clear in 2022, where he declared a youth mental health crisis. We know that 20 to 25% of youth will experience some kind of behavioral health concern before the age of 18. And we're seeing a lot of different socio-political, environmental events happening that are really shifting kind of the culture and how these psychosocial concerns are continued in the community. We see that, for youth who are seeking out care, they either receive no care or little care that is informed by the evidence base. And so, Keawe talked about this research to practice gap. It really is a long time. So on the one hand, we have kind of our randomized controlled trials or our factories developing all these interventions, which is great because this is what we need. And we have the community who really needs it, and we have this tiny little pipeline that goes in, that translates research to practice. And so Keawe mentioned it's a 17-year gap, and about 20% of our interventions after 17 years make it into communities. And this is really highlighted, by our colleagues at Harvard too, who mentioned that, as we're thinking about the research paradigm and the translational research paradigm, we have to start thinking about implementation and sustainability from the onset.
Hi.
And so really, thinking about kind of the public health problem, my research focuses on, this scientific problem of an oversaturation of knowledge and an oversaturation of information out there, and how to make things easier and more accessible for people delivering interventions and systems to deliver interventions quickly. So I'm going to highlight a few of the studies that we've done in partnership with the Cancer Center, Department of Education, State of Hawaii. I know we have Department of Education partners here on Hawai'i Island, and this is also funded by some of the amazing work that Keawe does through the PICO Center and Compassionate Ko'olau, which is our community partner. And so this work was funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse and the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. So a little bit about the context, and this is that we can address barriers and facilitators in order to get this to stick a little bit more in the community. I'm going to use stick in the community for the rest of my life. So the implementation survey that was developed, this was just published, I think like a week ago, in Implementation Research and Practice, was looking at kind of what are those major barriers and facilitators of the curriculum. And Scott on our team found that there were things related to the innovation, related to like HIDOE state level barriers, teacher level barriers and administrative barriers. So probably no surprise if you work in the DOE, there's so many different levels. It's like a hierarchy, as Trina would say, it's a fiefdom. And so there's very different, kind of things that kind of interplay with that. The highest impact barriers, it was interesting because they covered things that we had already been hearing from the community. So it needs updating, we need to make the curriculum accessible for different kinds of populations. And then we were also starting to see that there were things outside of the intervention, deliverer, in this case teachers, control. And so we really wanted to understand, how that impacts the implementation as well. Pretty similar in terms of the most difficult barriers. It's always kind of the competing demand or the relative advantage when there's so many different things going on in a teacher's day-to-day life. Like, how are you going to choose and make the decision to do that? So the final study that we did, and this was just published in School Mental Health in earlier this year, 2024, what we tried to do is use a kind of participatory engagement approach, qualitative approach called concept mapping. And what we did was we partnered with Windward District DOE as well as a few other state level administrative folks in the DOE to do this 6-stage study that looks at kind of taking those barriers and sorting them into kind of rationally derived concepts. And why was that important? Because we had this list of barriers, right, that we got from interviews and we got surveys and we got answers from teachers, but we also wanted to engage leadership and get their perspective on how these barriers and facilitators kind of interplay in order to understand, well, what is the area that we can target that can be the most bang for our buck? And so this is the concept map that was developed by HIDOE leadership. I will just note, without going into too much technical stuff, that the school level buy-in and the curriculum, they have higher layer values, which means that they're more kind of interdependent with other clusters, whereas the Kumu controlled, which is like teacher controlled, that one has the lowest layering value, which means that that one is the one that's kind of all grouped together. And that's important because when we think about addressing some of these barriers, our implementation strategies don't have to cut across different levels for these different concepts. We also produced the Go Zone. And really what the Go Zone does is overlays the impact and difficulty ratings of those different barriers, and we identify the high impact, low difficulty barriers, and we had a discussion with participants around, what could we do in order to address those. And so when we look at the Kumu controlled, area, it's just kind of lack of familiarity, resistance in terms of their own self-efficacy. The curriculum itself, it was pretty consistent with what we learned in the surveys. And then at the policy level, there are things related to kind of the structure of the DOE or health education standards. And that really was interesting to us because that gave us an idea of how we might move this curriculum forward. So what we did next was, have a discussion around how would you address some of these barriers and what would you do in order to kind of move this curriculum and get it to stick in the community. And so we got a lot of really good recommendations from DOE leadership around, using teachers to develop curriculum, creating learning collaboratives and PUIs around these things, and working on, PD 3 credits, or I think that's changing, it's something else soon, in order to sustain, keep the curriculum stuck in the community. Okay, I'm almost POW, I promise. Okay, so what's next? We're super excited. Oh wow, why is it doing that? That's fancy. We're super excited. We just got notice of award this week. Many thanks to Keawe for his support on this, from that National Institute on Drug Abuse, for a Racial Equity Initiative Visionary Award, where we're going to do a number of different kind of innovative methods and ideas to have community lead implementation for Ho'onopono. And so we're going to do that through student and community-led innovation tournaments, which helps to promote community voice, and ecological momentary assessment, which allows for real-time assessment of implementation in order to make adaptations to the curriculum. And so those are the big picture ideas that we're going to try to do. Oh, I won't go through this. Oh, it's kind of weird. But really, like, the big idea, like we were talking about, was shifting generations. So the idea behind this sticking it into the, that sounds wrong. Integrating into the community. I was going to say sticking it into the community, and that's just so wrong. Integrating it into the community is the idea that we're building implementation champions within the geographic region, right? So Kylene mentioned earlier that geographic communities are so different, right? And so when we're building champions, what we're trying to do in iterative phases over the course of 5 years is to build the skills within the community. So students and community-based organizations are going to lead the implementation effort. They're going to run the innovation tournaments, and they're going to have the tools and the skill set to apply that kind of method to any other problem that they face moving forward in terms of change or implementation. And the idea is that during kind of the summer months, the first group of folks who went through and led the change would then be the coaches for the subsequent year. And so they would plan and prepare and develop these materials. And the goal, right, is to phase us out as researchers and then to build that sustainable, that integrated structure within the community so that they can solve their own problems and we don't have to be there anymore. So the high risk, high reward issue, things that we're doing is really just challenging the existing research paradigm. We're really trying to develop a framework and a method in order to apply to other indigenous populations and people. Like, we really want to try to get these tools out in accessible ways in order to make change a lot quicker and faster. Remember that 17-year gap? We want to tighten that up. And I'm probably, appreciating the expertise here. I don't have to mention the ideas behind just addressing health equity here. And ultimately, oh, that doesn't look nice. The answers are in our community. So thank you so much. And I have to say, in Kalamai, Danny, like, usually I have another slide before this that shows our implementation research division team, and Danny would be on that slide, but she is not on this one. But Danny is a big part of our team, so thank you so much.
Got me turn this off, or I think goes. You don't want to take some questions? This poorly buddy? Sure.
Sounds like the elevator door's opening.
Oh, look, I can
Yeah.
battle you.
I'm sorry. We don't have a moderator, so we'll be the moderator.
Okay.
Any questions? Any thoughts?
Can I ask just a quick nerdy question? What your last 7 years looking at the metrics, and we're talking about social functioning and community connection. How did you, in terms like your studies plan and the way you were and qualitative evaluations, was it focus group? How were you collecting that data?
That's directed to me for the study.
Yeah.
We use qualitative and quantitative approaches. So we do focus groups interviews. We do a lot of focus group interviews with participants, with the Komohula who are delivering their intervention, and community partners, as well as in the actual measuring the outcomes. But we also look at some of the mediators and moderators, and social functioning is one, as well as others. We actually used this last project, we did use connectedness to land, actually, that was adopted from a American Indian colleague. But yeah, so many different ways we get information.
When I think about kind of attempts to bulk traditional metrics and still get money to do your study at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
I know that that's really challenging because you still have to use a lot of Western
Yeah.
design methodology. And so I'm so curious about folks that have been able to push a little bit and say our entire motivation is talk story, that and see if somebody will get the money. So,
Yeah.
because it's such an odd intersection,
Yeah.
right? It's such a strange intersection to even present in this way when we're talking about this kind of integration. I'm really curious about what you just said about the land-based piece, but I'll sort of concede my time.
But I want to touch on that a little bit. For some reason, quantitative research I don't know how it got a bad taste in people's mouth.
Yeah.
Our people counted. Our people navigated. They had to do some kind of science and math. They develop agricultural lo'is, terraces that fed thousands of people. Yeah. I think there's value to both, especially in those health sciences. Yeah, we're doing work where people's lives matter, and I do both qualitative and quantitative. And I can tell you, if you ask me a question about what I think is affecting my life, I'll tell you what's most salient to me. It may not be what's really affecting as a causal chain that I may target, because I don't live my life like that, right? And I learned that actually years ago when I started asking people in the community, what cultural aspects are influencing this? And people struggled answering that. They struggled answering that. I thought they wouldn't, but they did. And what they were really talking about was economic situation, was women were talking about how they have to pick up the slack at home and watch the kids and all this. So I learned from that, people don't put their lives in these boxes that we can easily just think that we do an interview and we get it. We have to really work hard extracting what we need from the stories. So I would say we need to do both. And I don't think funders are wrong to want, and I think big funders like NIH do want both. They want methods because the numbers tell you maybe some specificity or the strength of relationships and whether it's by chance, but the interviews tell us what does that really mean to people's lives and how does that really look. So I think there's value in both.
Oh, let me take that away from you, 'cause I don't know how to do it.
That's the right one.
Oh, that one. Okay. And I think I think other types of funders are looking for different types of community-defined evidence now. So, for example, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has this Indigenous Ways of Knowing kind of work that they're working on, where community is really defining, just the metrics by which we evaluate things. I think Tohoto is really involved in SAMHSA and their national network to eliminate disparities, and their Office of Behavioral Health Equity is really interested in community-defined evidence practice, CDEPs, and they're really trying to understand, how can we integrate that kind of knowledge, that kind of ways of knowing into third-party reimbursement, like Keawe is working on for, his intervention as well.
I think we have time for one more question.
I have a long one, but we can talk story later. Part of this is my own story, and I wanted your impression because of the diaspora of the Hawaiian people. I had I'd say about 10 to a dozen grand nieces and nephews, right? And they're all part Hawaiian. The majority of them have middle names, very long, Hawaiian names, right? So they grew up on the mainland, different parts of Illinois, Madada, Seattle area. What I find is that girls, and have them more girls, these are guys, girls pretty much thrived, whereas the guys did not. And they have no cultural identity. They're not, as you say, culture is not a son. Many of them, well, the girls also, some do drugs and gangs. The boys never got out of bed, right? So the parents couldn't do anything about it. And the grandparents had once to move, to better the lives of the family. They couldn't thrive here in Hawaii. So I was curious on who culture is medicine as a basics for your hula intervention with NIH. do you see as the next step to address the diaspora? And because you could really apply this to other cultural groups. It's just, and perhaps you have, right, in New Zealand, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So,
But anyway, to address the issue of cultures, as Mason was brilliant, I think, and there's so many subgroups of Native Hawaiians that we can address, because some of them will want to come home, but they don't see this as home anymore, and they're lost. So we call them lost souls. And I don't know if any of the studies here address that with partners and other universities. I know you work with Washington State. So I was just curious what the next step would be.
yeah. I do currently have an NIH contract to work with our Native Hawaiian Pacific and community health workers across 23 states on the continent, Hawaii, and in the Pacific with COFA-related states or countries. But that's not with HULA. That is actually developing their capacity to offer culturally informed evidence-based interventions around chronic disease. But we're reaching out to across, but you're correct. There's, since 2020 census, more Hawaiians now live outside of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, across the Pacific, for the first time, more Pacific Islanders from whether it's Samoa or Hawaii, they're now living on the continental U.S. more than their own homeland. So that's concerning, and for many reasons, economic and so forth. We still see, though, the same health struggles. Like, we looked at national data around NHPIs, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, and we struggle with the same health inequities. We still struggle with racism.
There's so many, Native Hawaiians, of course.
Yeah.
Boys, right?
Yeah.
But they in the Nevada,
Nevada, Utah.
and so many of our lost souls.
Yeah.
Because they're perceived as not Native Hawaiians, but they're perceived as
Mexican or something. Yeah.
Or
My nephew in
Native
Arizona,
American.
he gets discriminated against because they think he's Mexican. And then they find out he's Hawaiian, then all of a sudden it's a little better, but he's still discriminated against. But it's like all of a sudden not novel or exotic, right? No, they struggle with a host of things, and then they struggle with the disconnect, not being able to exercise or live that identity, right? And then question their identity because they're gone for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say there's some loss there.
It would be a fascinating study.
You're giving me more work.
to look at the concept and identify put them into the underlying issues because they're universal.
Well, one of the things we're trying to get larger national organizations that do data collections to start, because now we're starting to disaggregate data finally, right? So a long time, Native Hawaiian Pacific was aggregated with Asian, small populations, and so a lot of our inequities were pretty much hidden because of that. Now we're disaggregating, great, and we're finding that sure enough, we have bad outcomes.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to get more attention because of it. But now the challenge is, how do we make sense of that data, right? Just knowing that there's racial, ethnic differences in itself is not enough, right? What does it mean? What does identity mean? What does it mean in the context of certain geographical locations, right? Being Hawaiian in Hawaii probably means something different than being Hawaiian in Utah,
Yeah.
right? So, but we need to understand those things if we are to even, make a dent in these health inequities. So the next thing that we're trying to do is get national organizations that do these like breakfasts and so forth, is to consider looking deeper into, even for African Americans, Hispanics, their identity operates differently depending what generation they are, what geographical location, their SES status, and all this that can help us better address these inequities. But I think we're over time.
Just building on that real quick, I'm sorry. So being Native Hawaiian in Utah, Papaola Lokahi is starting their 50-state listening tour. I think they start in Utah, actually, early this August. So they're going to have a rich data on just what that looks like, in all 50 states. So I think Sherry is I call it her Eras tour. She's going on her Eras tour across the country.
Starting in Utah.